person takes a dive.
Investigators must unlock a murderer's secrets to discover who is most evil. A scale exists to measure the darkest corners of human behavior. It weighs the criminal mind and the crime. From impulsive murderers to serial killers, this 22-point scale attempts to determine who are the most evil. When a killer strikes, investigators must consider every possible motive, every potential suspect, in an effort to bring the murderer to justice. 1997, Miami, Florida. Famed fashion designer Gianni Versace was gunned down in front of his home. His killing set off a manhunt and terrified a city. 2006, Santa Clara, California. A convicted serial killer confessed to yet another homicide. But was he the real murderer or just toying with police? And in 1940s Hollywood, a young actress was ritualistically slaughtered. The killer has eluded investigators for decades. In each of these cases, detectives closely examined the criminal mind, seeking to identify the killer. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone has been exploring the nature of evil for decades. After studying hundreds of murderers, he's created a scale that helps determine method, motive, and malice. The more heinous the crime, the higher the criminal is placed on the scale. But when a killer is still at large, homicide investigators must search for clues to the killer's identity and where they are likely to strike next.
In order to place criminals on my scale, I must answer key questions about their methods and motivations. Are their crimes impulsive or calculated? Is their motive rage, jealousy, or torture? But I often have psychiatric profiles, biographies, even face-to-face interviews, which help me in making my final assessment. But investigators are often required to assess a killer's motive and method at the time of a crime. And their ability to make correct determinations is often the only thing preventing future violent acts.
One of the greatest challenges for investigators is tracking a spree killer. July 1997. Fashion maven Gianni Versace was shot dead in front of his Miami mansion. John Cameron is a retired police detective who spent years tracking dangerous criminals.
Immediately when you have the slaying of a celebrity like this, police have to wonder, is this a deranged fan? Is this a stalker? The spectrum of who could have done this is larger than in a regular homicide.
Witnesses described seeing a man flee in the direction of a multi-story car park. Inside, police found a pile of clothes, still damp with perspiration, near a truck. When investigators checked the truck's vehicle identification number, they discovered it was registered to a man who had been murdered in New Jersey 2 months earlier. The prime suspect in that case was wanted in connection with 3 other recent homicides. His name was Andrew Cunanan. Miami was tense with fear. Investigators believed they knew who the murderer was, but they didn't know where he was, or when he might kill again.
You have him linked to multiple victims in a short period of time. He is clearly willing to strike at any time.
Dr. Michael Stone painstakingly studies the techniques used by homicide investigators to enter the minds of killers. On July the 15th, 1997, fashion designer Gianni Versace was murdered outside his lavish Miami home. Police quickly linked the killing to Andrew Cunanan, a suspect in 4 other murders across the US. They needed to find Cunanan before he could kill again. Former police detective John Cameron has retraced the Cunanan investigation.
The evidence at the time suggests Andrew Cunanan is on a killing spree. You have him linked to multiple victims in a short period of time. And by the way he killed Versace in broad daylight on his front steps and didn't conceal himself in any way, he is clearly willing to strike at any time.
To understand what was motivating Cunanan and where he might strike next, the police delved into his background.
Spree killers represent a great challenge for investigators. Their acts of violence often appear to be random, with no discernible pattern. Typically, spree killers are usually driven by some sort of rejection that can make them feel desperate. The roots of this desperation can often be seen early in life.
Andrew Cunanan was born in 1969 and grew up in a middle-class family in San Diego, California. As a young man, he embraced his homosexuality and the gay scene. But he reinvented his background as one of privilege. He conned his way into a high-flying gay set, extracting money from his relationships with wealthy older men. Gianni Versace's luxurious lifestyle epitomized all he desired. In 1996, Cunanan's then-boyfriend, David Madsen, grew tired of his deceit and infidelity and ended their relationship. Cunanan was crushed.
What we know about Cunanan's early life tells me that he craves attention and has a great sense of entitlement. A combination of these traits can create a person that, under certain circumstances, becomes incredibly desperate. For most spree killers, there needs to be a trigger.
To uncover that trigger, investigators examined the first murder of which Cunanan was suspected. April the 29th, 1997, Minneapolis, Minnesota. A body was found in a downtown apartment. Jeffrey Trail had been beaten to death with a hammer and rolled up in a rug. The apartment belonged to Cunanan's ex, David Madsen, who had also gone missing.
This case had the signs of a jealous killing. It's always very personal and it's brutal, and they use unusual weapons because they usually use what's closest at hand rather than planning it out. The big suspicion was David Madsen probably killed Jeffrey Trail over a lover's quarrel.
But 4 days later, Madsen was found, shot dead near a lake 100 kilometers north of Minneapolis. With the first suspect now dead, police had to look elsewhere for the killer. In the apartment where Trail had been killed, investigators had found a duffel bag. Inside, they discovered bullets, the same caliber as those used to kill Madsen.
It wasn't until David Madsen's body was found that the detectives re-examined some evidence and found the name Andrew De Silva on the black bag, which was a name Andrew Cunanan has used in California. So that tied Andrew Cunanan to the homicides of David Madsen and Jeffrey Trail.
Investigators soon learned that Madsen had been Cunanan's boyfriend and that Trail had been a friend of both men. What they didn't know is why Cunanan would have wanted to kill the pair. Airline records showed that Cunanan had flown from San Diego to Minneapolis on April the 25th, 4 days before Trail's body was found. Cunanan hadn't purchased a return ticket.
Friends of the men speculate that Cunanan believed Trail and Madsen were having an affair and he snapped. And if this was truly a crime of passion and jealousy, his violent streak should have ended with the people he knew. But it didn't.
Chicago, May the 4th. Lee Miglin, a real estate developer, was found brutally murdered in his garage. His luxury car was missing. 3 days later, a police officer checked the number plate of a heavily ticketed vehicle parked near Miglin's house. It was registered to David Madsen.
After the killings of Trail and Madsen, this appeared to be a simple case of impulsive jealousy. But when Miglin is killed, police believe they have a spree killer on their hands. He's not only targeting people he knows, but strangers. It is a deadly situation.
Investigators were certain Cunanan would strike again. The only questions were when and where. 5 days later, they got their answer. On May the 9th, in a remote cemetery in Pennsville, New Jersey, another body was found. Caretaker William Reese had been shot dead and his truck was missing. The car Cunanan had stolen from Lee Miglin was found at the scene.
This is Cunanan's second attack on a complete stranger. Cunanan brings him into the basement and shoots him in the back of the head, execution style. Then he takes his car. The only motivation for this crime seems to be ditching Miglin's Lexus so he can keep the police off his trail.
Cunanan had killed 4 people in 3 different parts of the country.
Police put out a dragnet trying to catch him, but he disappeared. No sightings, no leads. It was incredibly tense, because at this point, you're almost certain he's going to strike again.
And he did. July the 15th, 1997. Fashion designer Gianni Versace was gunned down in cold blood. Cunanan was the #1 suspect.
This was a shocking crime, because it was such a different type of victim. First he killed 2 men he was close with, then 2 strangers, now a celebrity. Before, Cunanan seemed to be hiding his crimes. But the Versace murder was in broad daylight, almost an announcement, a craving for attention.
Miami police launched a manhunt.
Cunanan should be considered extremely dangerous and armed at this time.
Investigators uncovered an important clue, a pawn shop receipt signed by Cunanan.
Andrew was so desperate for money that he actually pawned off a bill coin that he had taken from Lee Miglin, his 3rd victim, and pawned it under his real name, and also listed his address at the Normandy Plaza Hotel.
Police learned that Cunanan had been living at the hotel for 2 months, and the evidence suggested that he was running out of money. The authorities believed they were finally closing in.
The entire investigation would just be totally focused on South Beach. They'd taken his vehicle that was in the parking garage, so he had no vehicle. He was no longer in the hotel. He didn't have his belongings, so they would be swarming this area, trying to find him. He was pretty much trapped here.
Hundreds of leads are in fact being traced as we speak. Thousands of flyers have been distributed throughout this community and the nation, on the internet, on television, in newspapers, across the globe. Andrew Cunanan is in fact a marked man.
On Wednesday, July the 23rd, an emergency call came in. A houseboat had been broken into and a gunshot heard inside.
They suspected that it could have been Cunanan right from the start.
That evening, a SWAT team entered the houseboat. They found Andrew Cunanan in a bedroom, dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had used the same gun that he'd used to kill Versace.
Tonight, all across the nation, our citizens can stand down and breathe a sigh of relief. The reign of terror brought upon us is over.